Tēnā koutou katoa, kua hui mai nei I runga I te whakawhanongatanga, I te matakitetanga. Kei te mihi ki a Ngāti Whātua. Ngāti Whātua. Kei a rātou te mana whenua. Welcome to all of you who are gathered here tonight to look into the future, to see what's coming next, to make connections. And I also acknowledge Ngāti Whātua, who have authority in this place. I'd like to also acknowledge Guy and Shruti, what a wonderful job they're doing for our little country and putting together this festival and how it's grown and how you are all now becoming part of that wonderful narrative. And also Pippa and Michelle who make this event happen. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy out here. It's also crazy backstage, just so you know. And for the next 2 days, I think it's going to get even crazier. I'd also like to acknowledge Tāniko Nordstrom, who will be sharing the stage tonight. You'll hear from her in a little bit. And I have a few friends in the audience. Hannah Peters, out there somewhere. Hannah, I told your mum and your dad I'd look out for you. Try not to embarrass you too much. This is actually the first time I've spoken in front of an audience of tigers and buffaloes. So, tigers and buffaloes with drums. So, I'm going to see how it goes. A little about me. Guy gave you the headlines. I come from two different worlds. I was born and bred in Timaru in South Canterbury, but I spent most of my life overseas. Most recently, most of my working life in New York City. Where, Guy, I just missed you there a couple of weeks ago. We were there. I work on some pretty interesting projects. I'm very fortunate. My day job, I spend most of my time running a company called Rangatira Limited. And Rangatira is a private investment company based in Wellington. One of the really cool things about Rangatira is that over 2/3 of our shareholders are not-for-profits. So the money, what we say is when we do well, our shareholders can do good. And some of those shareholders are charities that you might have heard of. J.R. Mackenzie Trust is the largest. One of my favourites is Outward Bound. Is there anyone here that's been to Outward Bound? Done the course Anakiwa? So I'm privileged to write these guys a cheque every year that helps pay the running costs and the wonderful work they do. And what we do at Rangatira is we invest money into small New Zealand businesses and we turn them into iconic New Zealand companies. So I might just do another little experiment here, see if you recognise any of these names. We were the first outside investors into a little company in the Hawke's Bay called Watties a few years ago. Anyone heard of Watties? That's a good sign. It's a very good sign. Another one of our companies that we work with now is Hellas. Makes a lot of bacon, a lot of sausages. The one that my kids love, and I'm bringing them up here next week, is in Manukau. It's Rainbow's End. Anyone at Rainbow's End? We've got the night ride starting at Rainbow's End next week. So if you haven't tried that, you've got to go try it. As Guy said, I'm also on the board. I'm also chair of Kia. Kia was founded by Sir Stephen Tindall. It's a global network of over 500,000 Kiwis, helping Kiwis around the world. And as Guy said, we talk about the borderless nation. It's this idea that there's not just 4.5 million of us here, but there's more than 6 million, 7 million of us around the world. And that wherever in the world you're trying to do something, wherever in the world you're trying to do some good, there's somebody there that grew up here. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if we could figure out how to leverage that? And some of those kids that grow up here go on to do amazing things, not just here but around the world. And I thought I'd give you a couple of examples. Dr. Catherine Moore is a woman born and bred in Dunedin and Queenstown, daughter of academics, moved to the US, studied at MIT and studied at Stanford. And she's now the world's leading expert in designing and making surgical robots. It was pretty cool. She designs robots that you can drop in between your ribs that do heart surgery that used to have to be done by teams of surgeons and take days. Is now done in 20 minutes with these little surgical robots that Catherine makes. Another one, Danny Arman, a friend of mine in New York, a little boy racer, grew up in the Waikato. He's in New York now. He's president of General Motors, one of the largest car companies in the world. So we're gathered here tonight, not too far away from where Kupe and his wakas came ashore 800 years ago. Kupe led his group of travellers on a long journey from Hawaiki, the ancestral homeland, the old homeland, to create a new home here on the edge of the known world. Now we're fortunate, we're blessed in New Zealand to have a rich history of forward thinkers like Kupe. Actually, I think we're blessed in New Zealand to have a rich history of forward doers. That's the beauty of it. We're not just thinkers, are we? We're doers. So doers like Kupe, who literally conjured up these islands out of the South Pacific Ocean. Doers like Kate Shepherd, who showed the world that women could and should have a voice. Doers like Michael Joseph Savage, who built a social safety net that ensured all New Zealanders, regardless of where they came from, could have a roof over their heads and food on the table in the evening. And by the way, he did that in the middle of a depression, which makes it even more remarkable. And whenever we recall those names and those stories of those leaders, those doers, I feel an incredible sense of what's possible in this country and in the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're gathered here tonight. It's a powerful, intoxicating thought, as Guy demonstrated just before. But it's interesting because a sense of what's possible can only take us so far. And those names and those stories belong to an older generation. Have you ever felt that those sorts of stories were something that happened to somebody else? That sort of leadership was something that other people did? You might be surprised to learn that each of those stories started with somebody who forgot to follow the rules. Someone who asked, why not, instead of why. Someone who asked, what's over the horizon? Now we need a new generation of New Zealanders to forget to follow the rules. This is where you guys start to come in. We need a new generation to ask why not instead of why. We need a new generation to ask what's over the horizon. And I think you, by mere virtue of the fact of turning up tonight and for this weekend, you are that new generation that we are looking to. We are looking to make a better nation, to make this nation better. We have a wonderful phrase in the US, in the United States. They talk about creating a more perfect union. And it's that idea of striving for perfection. That idea that even though we've never had it so good, global poverty levels are down in the single-digit percentages now. Life expectancy has doubled globally in the last 100 years. But even though we've never had it so good, there's still so much to do. So I thought I'd give you some ideas on what you can do and to challenge you as you go into this whirlwind of a weekend that's going to change you and allow you to change our world. One, I think it's important to learn from the past. It's important to see whose footsteps we follow in. It's important to see whose shoulders we're standing on. Like the navigators looking back, it's looking back that helps us see in which direction we're headed now. I'll tell you a little story about a woman, a very old woman. In 1975, when this country was in the process of being torn apart by the issue of Crown land, iwi land, and who had which rights and who owned what. A little old lady, nearly in her 80s, in Northland, was so frustrated with what was going on that she said, I'm going to Parliament to tell them what I think. And she started a march. And she marched south through Auckland, south through Tikuiti, Te Awamuru, south until she reached Parliament. And she had 1,000 people with her. And what this wonderful lady did is she lifted up a country and changed our perspective. Dame Fina Cooper, she's sadly no longer with us, but that change in perspective that she enabled is part of what's fueled the awakening that I think we've had in cultural terms in New Zealand over the last generation, over your generation. The second thing is ask what's the right thing. What's the right thing to do? And the interesting thing about the right thing is it's almost always never the obvious thing. Another story, in 1981, I was 11 years old. I was a rugby nut. Actually, I was a card-carrying rugby nut. I had a little card from the rugby union that said I could get in free to all the important games because I was such a young kid. And in 1981, as you may have read, the Springboks, the South African Springboks were coming to town. And my dad, a rugby nut, coached our rugby team. They were coming to Timaru to play South Canterbury. And I said to my dad, isn't this great? Isn't this great? You're one of the greatest rugby teams in the world. Not the greatest, one of the greatest. One of the greatest rugby teams in the world is coming to Timaru. We've got to go see these guys play. And I vividly remember Dad sitting me down and explaining apartheid and what it meant. And he said, if we go watch those Springboks, we're telling those South Africans that we support apartheid. And we're not going to do that. We're going to go down to the park. You come with me if you want, Phil. We're going to go down to the park and we're going to stand on the protest line. And that was the first time that I thought about what is right and what is wrong, what's important and what's trivial. And that's a lesson actually that, resonates with me to this day. It's a lesson I probably couldn't articulate until I was in my 20s, through my university years. The third thing is you've got to ask what's wrong. As I said before, we've never had it so good. I mean, humanity, we are healthier, we are less violent than we have ever been. But at the same time, there is so much to do. If we look around our beautiful little corner of the world, our rates of domestic violence are far higher than they should be. We still have children turning up for school in the morning hungry because mum and dad haven't been able to feed them in the morning before they leave and probably won't be able to feed them in the evening. So there's still so much to do. So much to do. But the good news, I guess, is there's no tools required. And the only rule may be to forget to follow the rules. You have all you need. If you look around you and you see the talent and the genius and the drive, you'll realize you have everything you need. Actually, the reason I'm here tonight, to pick up on what Guy said earlier, I'm here because of science, a recent scientific experiment that showed actually it's impossible to say no to Guy Ryan when he asks you to do something. So be careful if you run into him over the weekend. I want to reflect a little on New Zealand, New Zealanders, and who we are. And thinking about that and really going through some of the names and the leaders that I'd mentioned earlier and some of the others, I think is a really powerful thing to do as we look back in order to set our course for the future and what you're going to talk about, what you're going to learn, what you engage in over this weekend. And I think as New Zealanders, we are Kupe. We are Kate Shepherd. We are Nancy Wake. Anyone heard of Nancy Wake? Nancy left Wellington. She went halfway around the world to France. She recruited a secret army behind enemy lines, the French resistance. Secret army of 7,000 that helped defeat Nazi Germany. We are the explorers. We're Ed Hillary. Ed, most people know because he climbed a mountain called Everest. But what many people know, especially when I spend time in the United States, is what Ed really did. Ed's magnum opus, his signature achievement, he built hundreds of schools in Nepal. He educated 1 million children that wouldn't have been educated otherwise. He helped lift up a nation with his work for the Himalayan Trust. We are the farmers and the engineers who opened up the export trade for meat in 1882 and helped turn New Zealand into one of the richest nations in the world. We are the Rainbow Nation, first nation to outlaw intolerance. We are Sui Tan, a Malaysian immigrant who only came to New Zealand because Australia said, we don't want you. Now, with 3 medical degrees, he sits in a little lab in the Hutt Valley outside of Wellington, and he's working on unlocking the genetic code of cancer and finding ways to cure that disease. We are Dame Fina Cooper. We are Michael Joseph Savage. We are Mei Chen, who looked around and saw that Asian New Zealanders were underrepresented in leadership roles in this country and formed the New Zealand Asian Leaders Organisation to address that. We are David Longy, who went to the Oxford Union to explain to the world why we were nuclear free. We are Francis Valentine, who's teaching our teachers new ways to educate our children and your children's children. We are Amy Adams, who in Parliament last week announced a wide-ranging initiative to address the scourge of domestic violence in New Zealand. We are Jane Campion, who tells our stories on the big screen. We are Audette Excel. We've got some Audette fans out there. You've got to read about Audette. She built a new business model that recycles investment bank profits and turns it into good works that lift up the poor in Africa and in Nepal. We are Janet Frame, whose words helped explain the experience of growing up here on the other side of the world. And we are that borderless nation of 6 million, 7 million Kiwis around the world trying to transform this country for the greater good. We are the future. We are you. Haere takamua takamuri kaua e whai.